Welcome to the MZ Burning Glass monthly JOLTS live analysis. Each month, looking at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, also known as BLS's JOLTS report. JOLTS stands for Job Openings Labor Turnover Survey, an indicator to better understand labor shortages in the United States. On this March 29th, 2022, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by two MZ Burning Glass economists, senior labor economist Rucha Vankudre, and senior labor economist and author of The Demographic Drought, Ron Hetrick. But before we get started, if you are watching live and you have a question, you can drop those questions in the comments. So without further ado, Ron and Rucha, welcome to the studio.
Hi.
Thank you.
Well, we got the analysis. You've been on it for the last 30 minutes or so. And I want to start with you, Rucha. What are you seeing in your immediate analysis?
I think we're seeing that not much has changed, really. Openings are basically about the same. Hires and quits are mostly the same too. I think everything is kind of, continuing to have this really tight economy that we've been seeing. One thing that we've been noticing, though, is that as openings stay the same, unemployment does continue to fall. So we're now at about 56 unemployed workers for every 100 job openings. And that's just not a number that we're, going to be able to fill at all. And then I think the last thing is, it's not just that there's a lot of churn going on as well, I would say. So like particularly in retail trade, there's been an increase in openings, but also increases in quits and increases in hires. So everyone, I think, keeps just swapping around jobs. But other than that, we're still in the same place.
Ron, in your opinion, what does this all mean? So when you're looking at this data, it hasn't changed month to month that much, but some things are changing. Is it an indicator for the future?
Yeah, I think looking back at February, we're watching labor force growth, right? And you see that really the only growth we've seen in labor force participation rate kind of going into this year was more of a manipulation of statistics in the way that, BLS was kind of adjusting the population numbers. So when we look at this, just so many people, we still have 4.2 million excess numbers of people saying not in the labor force, even in the most recent month. So I don't think anything's a surprise when we see all of these job openings persisting, because you still are not seeing any meaningful traction in people returning back in. So the churn that Rucha was talking about makes sense. We keep increasing pay rates, but we keep recycling the same workers back and forth, and we're not getting new workers in to fill these job openings. So this is just going to continue this problem.
So there's certain industries that were really affected by the pandemic. And one of the highlights this month was specifically in the entertainment, art, and recreation area. Rucha, we saw an uptick in that specific industry. Any thoughts on that?
So, I think it's interesting, right? As you were saying, particular industries were hard hit. And this is, now February we're looking at. So sort of a month after the January fall that we saw. And so the three largest increases in openings we saw were in healthcare, retail trade, and arts and entertainment. And in healthcare was about 54,000 extra openings and 32,000 each in retail trade and arts and entertainment. So I think, we are sort of seeing that uptick. But at the same time, it's, what Ron was saying, which is that these are not really new and that people are just sort of moving back and forth. So I think it's kind of, as I said, what we expected.
So there's a couple of things that are happening in our economy right now. Well, there's a lot going on in our economy, but there's a couple of things and specifically that has been talked about quite a bit. And one of those things is inflation. And Ron, I want to go to you. Do you expect inflation to play a role at all in the future job numbers currently? What's happening in the job market?
Yeah, I think something we're really kind of watching here is when you look at these numbers, I was just talking about the number of people who are out of the labor force. And we do know that obviously a lot of these people were probably over the age of 55, a lot of excess retirements. However, we still have a significant, like 1.2 million prime age workers who are still saying, not in the labor force. And we do wonder, we start to look at how they were potentially paying for their bills. And we've had some increased data that is showing us, people are using credit cards, or people were using their money from their savings accounts, or, they're still using their stimulus payments. And I think, those monies don't appreciate while inflation's appreciating. So I think as people continue to eat through these alternative means of paying their bills, because of inflation, it will probably drive some people who are trying to stay out as long as possible back in. At least that's what we're really hoping. And I guess we'll find out in the next month or two.
Yeah, and I think it's a good note to also remember that these numbers are from February, which is almost 2 months, delayed. So some of the things happening in the economy might not take effect yet. Rucha, I want to go to you. Obviously, talking about inflation is specific to the United States. I want to just touch on a little bit any of what we're seeing globally right now and any of the global tensions. Do you believe that that's going to affect some of the numbers moving forward as well?
So I think, as Ron was saying, because this is February, it's not really showing up yet. But I think it's a good note that, we have the jobs report coming out this Friday for March. And I think if we were to see anything, it would be in that report. So I think that's something to keep an eye on.
So, Ron, back to you. We've kind of touched on it just a minute, but how is this going to affect employers going forward over the next few weeks, few months? Job numbers haven't changed, but as you guys have already mentioned, unemployment continues to decrease. The labor is getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, the biggest concern certainly is that we keep hovering at these really high job openings numbers, and yet our unemployment rate keeps kind of edging down. If you go back to right before COVID, we had, a 3.5% unemployment rate. This is before COVID. That was an all-time, record low. And yet we are sitting here on this mountain of job openings, these record numbers that we continue to hover around, and we're sitting at 3.8%. And you start to wonder, like, how low can you go? Because if you look at a lot of these openings, right now you've got, manufacturing still sitting up, roughly about almost 900,000 openings, and retail up around 1 million, and eating and drinking places. These are in-person jobs. So we're going to have an imperfect labor market. You're not always going to have the people in the locations where some of these things are going to be. So how low can our unemployment rate get if a lot of these openings are for companies that need people who live right down the road from them, and those people may not exist in that market? So start to get a serious concern as to, are we going to run out of those people who can fill these service level jobs that we so desperately need to fill right now?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Rucha, I know that this is kind of a really common question each month is, not much change from month to month. So is this what we're expected to see perhaps for the rest of the year? Is this steady as it goes?
I mean, I have trouble imagining how things could change just in the next couple months, at least, given, people still need, like, these openings are still going to be there. Unless employers make some drastic decisions about trying to cut back their workforce, I don't really see how things could change. And I mean, to some extent, these are trends, right? So you don't expect huge swings unless something like a pandemic stops in. So even though it is as expected, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, right? It means we are continuing, things will continue to be hard, and I think everyone's going to continue to feel this strain, but I don't see an easy way out of it.
Ron, I have a question for you. One of the more fascinating indicators right now is our economy is still growing, and specifically production output is up, GDP is growing, and yet we have less people, what it feels like less people doing those jobs, right? And so potentially, what do you think that this could mean kind of long term, in the fact that to maintain that production output, we're going to need people, right?
Yeah, the one thing that kind of concerned me in this report was manufacturing quit rates shot up to a new record high. And I'm just really concerned about, we are pushing an enormous amount of output through a smaller population. Like I just mentioned, manufacturing job openings are hovering at record levels. And yet, we are able to produce right now. But the question comes, is this something that manufacturing companies have adapted in a short time frame to do this? How are we accomplishing these things? And can we continue to keep that labor force engaged, or do we risk, potentially burning them out? I think that's part of my primary concern, just kind of looking at this, is you can run for so long, you can promise people for so long that we're going to be hiring new people, we're going to hire new people. But as they're looking beside them and people keep quitting, and they're asked to do more and they're asked to do more, you do wonder, how long people can hold out. So it's just something you got to keep your eye on.
No, that's a great point. Rucha, just to kind of close things out here, give me your key takeaways from this specific report this month.
I think the key takeaways are, openings basically the same, very high. Unemployment slowly edging down, as Ron said. So fewer and fewer available people to do the jobs that we need them to do. I think, we're seeing a lot of churn in a few different industries, such as retail, entertainment, construction. Quits actually in retail were at the highest among the other industries this month, one of the highest at about 74,000. And so I think, that's an industry to keep watching. And, I think we'll see more about what's happening globally, hopefully in this Friday's jobs report.
Ron, similar question to you, your key takeaways, but what does those key takeaways mean going forward?
Yeah, brutal battle for lower skilled employers occurring. You see really high record. We just keep hovering around record levels. Retail, trade, restaurants. Even though restaurants have come down and hotels have come down the past 2 months, you're still talking, 1.4 million job openings. Like, these are significant numbers. So, people who are out there competing for that high school diplomaed person, there's just not a whole lot of those people out there. And I think that takeaway is what's going to continue to drive us forward through this year. Is you have a lot of companies out there saying, I'm looking for this type of worker. And now you have companies that usually require college degrees, and they're starting to drop those degree requirements, meaning they're now entering into the fray to find the same worker that doesn't exist already for the rest of these companies. So I think that that's one of the key takeaways. Interesting, you got to keep our eye on some of the supply chain issues. I've noticed that transportation and warehousing had a drop in job openings. Their quit rate went down a little bit. Manufacturing had a slight drop in some openings. You start to wonder, will these things actually affect the ability to hire, or the desire to hire, if you are having issues even getting product in to then process that into other goods? And then I think the last key takeaway, obviously, is this. We have all kinds of inflationary forces, but one of the biggest is that as long as people aren't coming into the labor force, we're going to keep paying more and more because companies are trying to get work done and they're getting more desperate. And yet all of those pay increases, as we keep saying every month, they're not drawing people in from the sidelines. We're just churning the same people over and over.
It's a really good point. Ron and Rucha, we appreciate your early morning analysis. We are so thankful for just what you bring to the table. For those of you watching today, if you want to learn more about this analysis, you can go to mzbg.com. Thank you for joining us on this live event.